Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Harebrained Games. Today we're going to do a review of the Barracks Emperors. The Barracks Emperors is a game by Brad Johnson and Ray Farrell. In the past, these two had teamed up to do a game called Time of Crisis. This was a game set in the Roman era where you were vying for control in the Mediterranean region. It is a very different game from this, which is a card game set in the time of crisis period of time. There are 45 emperors vying for control. You're attempting to influence them, and this is a far more this is a simpler experience than that. Whereas that game was multi-hour, dig in deep and play. This is a much more simple trick-taking element game. Yes, it is literally a trick-taking game set in a Roman historical era. Enough chit-chat. Let's take a look. Okay, so what comes in the Barracks Emperors, a card game set during the time of crisis? You get a very large player board. I think it rivals that of the Time of Crisis board itself from the original strategy game. You get a variety of cards. You get Emperor cards. These are here. I'm not going to... the meeples don't come with it. These are visualizers for me to help people when they're playing the game, kind of get a better focus on the emperors versus the surrounding cards that are going to be used to influence them. It's just a little bling that I do that's helped out when I'm showing the game to the local groups and such. And then I do elevate them a little bit. I've got coasters that I elevate them so that, I don't know, it's just kind of an homage to Vanish the Snakes and how I did it. Anyway, you have these Emperor cards, and these Emperor cards are going to be what you're vying for control of. Your victory points are, in fact, how many of these you control. Simple enough. You also have influence cards, and these influence cards, everything's square in... yeah, look at this, town square. So you'll have a variety of different colors, and you'll have a variety of different numbers. I think there's 3 colors, well, 4. There's 3 main colors. It's a trick-taking game, and so 3 main colors. And then the barbarians, which are surrounding the edge, are a 4th sort of colorless color, although they're not considered influence cards. Make note of that. And then you also get a manual, the rules of play, which is very, very short. In fact, the rules themselves can be determined in, I think, the first 4 pages are the rules. After that, it's variants and rules for different player counts, solo variant, and then examples of play. So really, really simple game. So as far as the components involved, and that's what you get. It's let's just get into how to play. Okay, let's play a match of the Barracks Emperors. What is the purpose of the game? The purpose of the game is to win. You win by scoring victory points. You earn victory points when you have successfully procured one of these emperors over into your tableau, which you will store. You will earn a single point for each emperor. You'll earn a single point in those rare times when you have barbarians, and then you will earn points for every set of 3. And so you're going to want not just to get emperors, but you're also going to want to get them in all of the 3 colors. This is at its heart a spatial trick-taking game. We have set up for 4 players, which means that all 4 sides are represented here, and everybody starts with their own player card, and they start with 4 of the influence cards from the draw deck. Now this is what's interesting. Your player turn, which card you pick, is indicative of the side you're on. This is a game that requires you to think on your side. By that I mean that you can only play cards with these swords. If this is your symbol, notice here, all these cards have 4 different sides. And so you got sword, 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 sword. You can only place a card, if you are the swordsman, where it matches up to that side. That's what's interesting. That's what makes this spatial puzzle so more rich in decision making than you might first expect. For example, I couldn't place it here because I'm not placing it where where it's connecting to my symbol. So not here. Now at the start of the game, there's very few places you couldn't put something. A couple up here, but in general, all of these here, you could place your card. That changes over time as the board gets populated, as emperors are grabbed by opponents, and it sort of empties out. Once one of the players playing the game cannot make a move, they reveal their hand, and that ends the round. And so you do have sort of a variable clock going on. So let's just go with it. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to win tricks, and everybody's taking their turn. So we'll start here. So on your turn, you play a card to the board or discard a barbarian card. Barbarians are kind of the catchphrase here. That you notice they're all around the periphery of the board. You can add a barbarian in any homeland space. So in like, because you're trying to mess around with people. There's 0 influence, which means they kind of mess up, but they can also be used to maneuver. You can also move one diagonally to cover up other influence cards. Why are you doing that? What is the point? Each of these areas, each of these 4 squares around an emperor is kind of a miniature battleground. And in that place, you're trying to vie to have the largest influence on your side over the other 3 areas. Now there's going to be times when you're going to place a card, and when you place that card, not only are you considering yourself. For example, if I place this here because I want to have influence here, I'm also by default giving influence this way too, which may wind up either backfiring or having to find some way to mitigate that later on. And so let's just go over around. We're not going to do special abilities yet. We're just going to show you. So what am I going to do here? Well, I'm going to play the 6, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to play the 6 right here. And I'm going to play it here. Okay, why am I doing that? Well, this is the color, blue, and this is so that's the trump color for this particular emperor. So if I play a blue card, the trump cards are going to get evaluated before I enter the card. So for example, someone played a yellow 8 here, the trump card is going to win, and so you're not, yeah. That said, a lot of special abilities will mitigate that, change that, alter that, but for now, keeping it simple, that's what you can do. So then I played a card. Now I can take one of these cards depending on what was the value of the card I played. I played a 6, which means that if I play a 6 or less, I can take this card. If I played a 4 or less, which I didn't, I could take this card, and a 2 or less for this card. Why does it matter? Because the more powerful cards are always going to be ordered. Every time you grab one of these, it's going to be sorted in order so that the lower number cards are going to be up here where, like if you play a big, powerful 8 card, well, you're going to get whatever low card is here. Whereas if you play, for example, a barbarian card, well, then you get the pick of the mill, because that's 2 or less. You can have this one, this one, this one. More opportunities, more choices, better ingredients, better pizza. All right, so I played a 6 or less, so I'm going to grab this card. It goes into my tableau. We refresh, and we reorder. Again, we reorder, and there you go. Step 1. Now it's time for our turn over here. And again, this time we're thinking this way. The player is playing this way. And so that player is going to have to think, okay, what can I put in this direction that's going to make it so I win? We'll do this one. And this is why I think it's cool. We're going to play this one. This one is interesting. If I play this here, I'm playing this here for this purpose, but notice that it's going to influence everything else around. It also means that one more card, and this is complete, and I can resolve this particular emperor. But the Quester, and I promise we wouldn't do special ways, but we will. The Quester, even though it's a small number, the trump suits are ignored whenever any emperor is resolved that involves this card. And this card is going to involve all 4 of these. What I've done here is set it up, even though it's not the trump value, well, it doesn't matter, because this card basically says the color's irrelevant, now it's just the numbers. Alright, and so we do that. It's 3 or less, and so I could pick this one, or this one. I'm going to pick that one, put it over there. Again, we're going to draw. We're going to go, look, that just fits in nicely. And then we're going to do this side. And this side now, you'll notice, has the pillars, or the fortresses. And so it's going to be looking this way for cards that it can play. And let's do this. It's going to place it right here because it has a spot here. Notice it couldn't put it here because, well, it could actually, but as it gets, I'm trying to find a place where it couldn't fit. Obviously not there yet. Anyway, Yeah, so we'll just go with it. Right now, we're pretty safe. It's pretty open. All right, so now we've done this. We've placed our card. Now we have to resolve the emperors if they're completed. Okay, we have a completed emperor here. And the active player gets to choose what order, because sometimes you play a card and multiple emperors are going to be resolved. It just cascades that way, and it's up to the active player to decide which of the emperors to do first, because sometimes you'll resolve an emperor and it will then make it so that another emperor does not get resolved after all, etc. So now we look. Do we have any special abilities? Yes, we do. This card says that this color is ignored. Now, if it wasn't for this quester, darn you, quester, says this player down here, this would have won. Because it's the trump value, it's 6, it would have won. But this negates the trumping, which means, guess what? This one goes over here. And this is the first emperor that is earned for this group. And so so that's a point already. So that's strikes first. And then this card is discarded, which opens up opportunity. And there you go. Do we have any other that are resolved? No. All right. So there we go. You can see kind of how it goes. The only other rule also is that if there is a resolution and you have, for example, same cards, these are instantly removed from consideration no matter what. Doesn't matter Trump or whatever. If you have a situation where you have an emperor here, we'll just go over that, an emperor here, and before even resolving anything else, you look and go, okay, any duplicates are just negated. It's possible to even have 4 6s, in which case nothing happens. It's possible that barbarians surround everything, in which case it's just, he's assassinated, goodbye. And you will find these are very colorful descriptions. A lot of these guys were assassinated or died, in ways that were less than delightfully pleasant. So anyway, and that's what you're going to do. All the players are going to continue to go around and around until you've cleaned out the board so much, and there's going to be times when you literally, for example, if any card is ever just out of the running where it's so far away from a emperor that it has no consideration, it can be removed and it's going to clear off. When that happens, when a player cannot make any more moves, the round is over. And you basically reset and do this 2 more times. And at the end of the 3rd round of that, you will all count up your points. And again, it's you get a single point for every card, and then you get you also get points for sets of 3. And so that's as simple as it gets, honestly. There's some easier rules where they suggest maybe playing with just the numbers and not worrying about the special abilities. And those special abilities, let's just go over a couple of those. They are pretty legionist. For example, the Pretender, you can place one of the emperors. There's some emperors set aside. You can place those in unoccupied spaces. You've got Force March. Normally you have to place in a legal spot. In other words, you have to only place where there is an opportunity for your side, your icon, an empty space next to it. Force March is interesting in that you can play this card in any space adjacent to any emperor. Now, why would you do that? Well, maybe you can see a way to close up shop and you're like, oh, if I place this here, that would be bad for me, but I can place it in a way that will close it up so that I end up winning. Say, for example, this was an 8, and I could place this, close it up, and then I'd sort of trigger a victory. So there's clever little ways to use these cards. I'm not going to go into all of them. There's also some cards that will let you play one, and then you can add some value to other cards to help beef it up so that you end up winning a trick that you were in the middle of losing, etc. But that's it. That's the general gist of the Barracks Emperors. Now we'll get into my final thoughts. Okay, let's go over final thoughts on the Barracks Emperors, a card game set during the time of crisis. That's right. First of all, as always, we go over the cons first, then we go over the pros, and then we go over my final thoughts. As for the cons, let us start with just not a con. Let's start off with just the expectation. This is not your typical GMT fare. GMT is known for a lot of historical wargaming, etc. This game, while set in a historical game, is kind of off on its own little island insofar as that it does not represent necessarily the deep, thinky games of even its own predecessor, its own previous game in the Time of Crises universe. And so just be aware of that, whatever. And for the audience, and this is rated a 3, and I agree with that. I think this is a simple game that one round of this and you'll know what to do and you'll get it for the most part. I do think that it can be daunting once you set it up with all the different square cards in this matrix of display. This is sort of like the deep thinkers code names in some way someone described it as, and it's kind of funny, but which, I mean, again, looking daunting is relative. I mean, Mr. President's in the background, so yeah, take the statement as relative. But there is a lot going on once you're playing the game with all of the rules. It's one of the reasons why I did that elevation trick. Like Banish the Snakes did, it helps segregate the noise of the various colors and cards a little easier for new players beginning to play the game. And then we just kept it because we like how it looks. That aspect of just making it simpler view is most paramount for casual gamers, who I think will find this up their alley way more than they realize that they would. One particular facet of play in teaching this, there's one particular thing that's just a recognizable little hurdle, little speed bump to go over, is that when you're playing this is just to realize the relative position you are to the board is the relative position of the cards you play. And that spatial understanding can be easy to forget, particularly the first couple times when you're like, I mean, when you start off, you can literally put the card anywhere, and sometimes you'll put a card somewhere and it just happens to be legal. But then you're like, no, you remember this side you're on, you have to find an empty space in that spot. And then people will get it and they'll start, but even later on there might be like, oh, you can't put that. Yeah, but it's so easy to fix. Like, there you go. So but it is one of the things that I think separates it from other games, in that you have to be mindful of the orientation of moves you can make from your view versus this person's view, that person's view, and that person's view. And this is one of the more thinky, puzzly experiences for certain groups. I mean, again, like this isn't Dark Summer or anything like that. But for the type of game that is, for the simple game that it is, there is a tendency to try and min-max, to try to AP analysis paralysis as you're trying to solve the best move for the board state. So that's another thing that might kind of slow people down sometimes when they're thinking through all the possibilities. And you can get some vectors of input that oftentimes are like, hey, that's be a great place to put it. Well, yeah, because it helps you too, or more. There's been some talk about how at its essential, in the essential point of it, this is a big board. This board is bigger than some of the coin games I have, the actual board layout. And there's been some discussion whether they really could have made it optional and lowered the price. Sure, they could have, I guess. I mean, at the end, it's a simple game, comparatively speaking, to the GMT Fair, but at the same time, because of the spatial nature and because of the way that it's set up in the cards and all the information in the cards and all that, I really relish that they gave the board. I would actually be less inclined to have backed it, which I backed it late. I backed it sort of on like, yeah, you know what, I'll give it a shot, and I'm glad I did. I've been doing that lately. But the board is not optional to me, because it sets the cohesion of the framework, so that as you're looking at this matrix of cards all around, you've got places for your different decks and whatever. Everything's on the board. You don't have to worry about stuff being off to the side, pretty much at all. And so everything is there. Everything's in its place. I think it's a nice pamper point for me to actually have this board to help set everything in, and it's gorgeous in the underneath. Like, I just really like it. So it reminds me of PAX Renaissance, which the first edition didn't have a board, and so you had to lay out a matrix of card, and you would put pawns in between the cards and whatever, but it was up to you to do. But when they came out with the board, warped as it was, it just added cohesion that made it just easier, not only for me to play, but for me to teach, which is something I'm going to be doing with this game, because this game is ripe. This would be a great convention game. It will be a great convention game. It's just, and so being able to teach it quickly and have it just, resonate quickly, anything that helps with that is good to me. And there's times, the one thing I'll say is that there are times, particularly later on in a round, when you're kind of closing in the gap, and it is cool that you have this, timing where, like, you don't exactly know when the round's going to end if someone winds up not being able to play a turn, but there are times when you have to do a move that's just frankly not optimal for you. You're just kind of like, I gotta do something. This is, you have some flexibility, but not a ton, but there's times it's like, all right, well, I got to do this. It's going to score that. He's going to get that. She's going to get that. Um, and that's, that can be a big Roman bummer. But at the same time, I mean, an argument could be made that if you play better earlier in the game, welcome to chess, that maybe you won't get in that spot. So anyway. And then the final question that I've been getting a lot is, would I buy this game purely for solo? And the quick answer is no. But I would wait for my pros section too, so that you can understand what the ramifications for me to come to that conclusion, because I don't find the solo unsatisfying at all. But let's get into the pros. All right. This is a game set in the time of crisis world, but it's its own beast. It's its own thing. This is not a watered down, time of crises simplified version or time of crises in 10 minutes kind of thing. No, this is an orthogonal endeavor that holds its own for what its design intent is. I am grateful for the extra touches in the game. Like I said, the board helps meld an otherwise disparate array of information into a more cohesive whole. The cards are very elegant. They're square. The square makes sense. I'm not used to square cards, but I get it. I like it. They why not? But don't use them as coasters. Use coasters on them. The simple mode is a good starting point. There's a simple variant that just says, look, just look at the numbers and play off the numbers. Don't worry about the rest of it. Just play the simple code. That's a really good thing to do. As a matter of fact, in the games I played, the first round was that. By the time the first round of the 3 rounds in a game was over, easily throw in the special abilities for round 2 and 3, and by then it's like, oh, now we get it, because it's really, the special abilities on the cards bring the game to its full intended fruition. And the barbarians, and how they move and manipulate, how you can manipulate them. The special abilities means that the baseline might be trick taking, but then it explodes into these deep decisions galore, which again can add to the AP if you're not careful, because you think, oh, I got the numbers down, but then I forgot about this particular card that negates the trick, the trick, the trump suit. So the rules are fantastic. I mean, the full set of rules for this game weigh in at 6 pages, and that includes copious examples of play. And so this is not going to be a problem to be able to quickly get up and teach at all. Now let's talk about the solo game. The solo game is its own manifestation. A lot of times you'll see, and we've seen this before, and it's a perfectly reasonable approach to say, okay, we have this multiplayer game. Now what do we need to tweak and fix, and what changes do we need to make it work solo? That's not really what's done here, because the solo mode is its own entire beast. It's its own method and system and layout of play, with its own victory conditions, and its own rules, its own steps, etc. And so I found it pleasant. I found it satisfying. The rules are, it's sort of like it's Roman castle panic kind of thing, but that's a very big simplification. But they did a really good job of saying what would make solo satisfying, not just what could we do to make multiplayer work with solo. And I like that they did that. They clearly put a lot of thought and effort into it. I wouldn't buy it just for the solo play. But playing solo is perfectly fine. I mean, I think maybe one of the problems is that it shines so much at 4 players that I really just prefer that way. So that's it. And speaking of that, I will always play this 4 players. I will often play it solo. I mean, since I have it for 4 players anyway, yes, I will play it solo and it will be satisfying. I would maybe play it 2-player. I guess it's okay. I would not play a 3-player. I'm not big on the dummy player. It really is meant, it seems like it's meant to be a 4-player game. You've got all 4 sides. That's really where it rocks it in the realm of what it's trying to be. And I like the fact that even though it seems simple, and it is simple, and your turn is basically simple, play a card, result what happens, grab another one. And I like the fact that that you have this waning waxing of that forum kind of approach, where I'm going to play a big awesome card now, but I'm just going to have to take this really puny card. But if I manage to pull off something where I can play a less potent card and then get a choice over here of a better card back, that might be a better move. I like that tension. It's almost like this game has kind of a Vital Lacerda kind of game, his games, where one simple little action, you could literally describe his, Vital's games as just do one of three things on your turn, but it's really not that, is it? It's one simple action, but then involves a lot of mental prep work, followed by a cascade of consequences that either happen then or happen later on as a result of it. And those side effects and consequences are legion. You weigh the benefits for you versus the benefits of others, because when you're laying a card down, you're laying a card down for, one to three other sides, and going like, am I possibly able to pull this off? If I can get around back to myself, could I play this card that actually finally helps me, figure out that I can, somehow slip through and win? The fact that you've got the duplicates get thrown out really changes things up. That's clever. It keeps things from just cementing into state when you can be like, I can do that, especially with the special abilities. Blah, blah, blah. I go on. In the time of crisis, the representation here is very clever. It's subdued, but it's clever. With these emperors, the emperors, beings, they don't differ other than color. So it's not like, oh, this emperor gives you this bonus. I kind of would have liked that. I know that adds that's just another layer of complexity that isn't necessary. But just having like, hey, this emperor is like, +1 to your next card and whatever. But they already have that in the abilities of your influence cards. And then you've got the conflicts and contention as they resolve. And then you've got the fringe barbarians that are around the edges, nice touch, and they as over time they kind of make their way in to try and you can indirectly cause trouble and disruption to other groups, and even though all of those cards, I love reading about them. Most of these emperors have the middle name of assassinated, and so it's funny to kind of see them all arrayed out and described. There isn't a lot of there isn't a big playbook that gives you like the history of it, so you see the cards really tell the story of these emperors. So, final thoughts on the Barracks Emperors. That's right. I'm so giddy I forgot the name. I love trick-taking variations. That doesn't mean I love the trick-taking part. I've been growing up on trick-taking games for years. That's like saying I'm passionate about the muffler of my Maserati. No, I'm passionate about the Maserati. The muffler just happens to be there. It's the Maserati part that tickles my tangerines. And I'm also a big fan of anything where I can look at it and go, well, that's clever. I wouldn't have thought of this. And I think this game fits that category. That said, there is another game very, very much like it that has come out recently in the past called Brian Boru. Brian Boru is also a trick-taking game with a map where you are vying for control over a region. And had Brian Boru not existed, this would have been the breakthrough game in making trick-taking games for deeper thinkers. That said, my personal belief is that Brian Boru, if you get a chance to play it at 3 to 5 players, is and it graded all those player counts in my opinion, is still the king in that regard for me as far as fitting into that theme. It has a smoother, more fluid presentation of the trick-taking spatial puzzle conjunction, but teaching-wise, they're about the same. And honestly, I was very surprised at how much I enjoyed this game and how much I enjoyed teaching this game and how much I enjoyed having people who aren't part of the GMT flock being able to come in and play this game quickly and easily. I will be taking it to conventions during convention season. The Barracks Emperors, unlike many Roman emperors and such, accomplishes what it sets out to do, and that was to take a trick-taking formula and firmly apply it to a time of crisis setting in an approachable and pleasantly satisfying way for almost any gamer that's not yet been assassinated by the Praetorian Guard. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Harebrained Games.